and welcome to the regular season recap for Season 9 of the Wooper Club League. I am IllLogic, coach of the Buffalo Bouffalant. I am joined, as always, by Steve, coach of the Waterdeep Wobbuffets.
Hey everyone.
As well as, once again, Michael, coach of the Route 1 Birbs.
Good to not have been kicked off this yet.
Not yet. Keep flattering us, and you'll keep finding your way on. We all had pretty similar ends to the season, and we'll go over that in just a little bit because our regular season has concluded after 11 weeks. Steve, you are one of the commissioners of the league. We made it through somehow. What are your thoughts from a commissioner's standpoint about how the season went overall?
Looking at the season, I think it was a lot of fun. It was a very unique idea. I really haven't seen too much of any multi-battles going on. Definitely unique, was a lot of fun. I know we've had some people stop in battles and be like, whoa, what is this? And, there seems like an interesting idea that could catch on. Of course, the logistics at some points were a little troubling. I know there were a couple matches that were missed and had to be made up later, but they all got played. I know scheduling was a little tricky where, someone's like, yeah, I work 8 to 5 and I'm gone this weekend and I work evenings. And well, there you go. That's it all the time. So scheduling, sometimes a little tricky, but all in all, I think everyone enjoyed it. I think it was just nice to get to work with everyone and kind of get more thoughts on team prep. I know sometimes certain players aren't able to do as much in 1 week. They have a busy week or whatever, and that, could impact, the season and working with different people, but all in all, great season. I think it was a big success, and it seems like everyone enjoyed it, so I'm looking forward to potentially future multi-battle seasons.
Yeah, this was, I think, a very successful experiment for sure. It seemed like they had a lot of fun. Everyone did. It didn't seem like you had too many complaints of any kind towards you all, so great job running the league and everything. But with that said, with the regular season finished, we have some winners and some losers. We're going to go over the teams that missed out on the playoffs first. That will, of course, be starting with the Mighty Miltanks, with Tony, the Cincinnati Incineroar, with Matt. We've got the Summit County Psyducks, with Zach, and the Boulder Bulldors of Sasbo. And we just kind of want to touch on these teams a little bit because there are some things definitely to talk about. For me personally, having made the bold prediction in our last video that Sasbo had a real shot at the playoffs here, very disappointing to see him so close and almost making it, but not quite finishing the season strong, 4-2, but just missing out there just a little bit. A couple very close games in there too. It seemed like he really came to his own, really figured out what he needs to be doing with some more of the individual mons. The Rotom switching was amazing. Whimsicott ended up putting in a lot of work. Cool to see him evolve throughout the season, but it did not quite translate into a playoff spot. Still want to highlight a very strong second half from Sasbo. Steve, what do you have to highlight from this group of four?
I will be taking a less positive route just because I know I can pick on Matt. I know Matt was frustrated with the end of his season, and as a coach, falling off in recent seasons, it happens. I know some other coaches have maybe been putting in more time or more effort, and falling to almost last place, not a great look for him. Hope back in future. Potentially more work, but we'll see how that goes.
Absolutely. There were still some positive things here. That Ferrothorn was just a pain to deal with, but and ended up being a little disappointing for him. And then, Michael, what do you have to highlight from these bottom teams before we move on to the playoff contenders?
Yeah, I think I just want to point out, Zach and the Psyducks. I think we had a fair pattern this season of people kind of finding their MVPs and kind of sticking to them. And, Zach had a lot of strong Pokemon, but maybe they were a little too one-dimensional because he didn't really seem to find that, backbone to always rely on.
I think that's totally fair. As someone who had predicted him to make the playoffs with relative ease at the beginning of the season, looking back on this, I definitely see some of those weaknesses coming to light on the team. Several different flying types, a couple of ones that are extremely one-dimensional. I look at Dusclops in particular, noted doubles mon, but can't always bring it, and when it does, you know exactly what it does. So some positives, some negatives here, and end up just missing out a little bit. But with that said, we're going to again talk about the 8 teams that did make the playoffs, and that's going to start with the Seattle Steamrollers, coached by Chad. Steve, what do you have to tell us about Chad's season?
So Chad picked up at the end of the season, going 3-3 in the second half, just enough to finish 5-6, +2 differential despite a losing record, and getting that 8th place finish. In the last week, he was able to secure his own place, didn't have to rely on other people doing it for him. As I mentioned, did the bare minimum to get in, but made it to the playoffs nonetheless. It seems like the trade for Bouffalant is working out for him, and I would agree that it offers a little more variety in his offense than Alakazam had. He's also kind of the most successful we've had with Trick Room, mainly because he has a half of his team built solely for it. Although there hasn't been a lot of it, he has been one of the few to make it work consistently. And both in Trick Room and out, Horse has been very solid for him. I know he's a big fan of it. When I partnered with him recently, he's like, "Oh, it doesn't matter if it's getting outsped. This is a solid mon, and it's got the coverage and stats to make it work." So, shout out to Horse.
Shout out to Horse indeed. Michael, anything else you'd like to add about Chad's team and season?
Nothing in particular. Yeah, I think, some just real strong Pokemon that, when they got in the right situation, there just wasn't a whole lot you could do about them.
Absolutely. I feel like kind of the definition for the season is if you brought something to counter the strategy he brought, you were probably going to win, but if you didn't bring quite the right mons, he does find a way to exploit and destroy you. Still a very scary team, even if he just barely snuck into the playoffs by a single win-loss game. Everyone else actually finished above 500, and that means we get to talk about Stevie here again. The coach that, without any success before this season, somehow 6-5 record, very impressive. Michael, what do you think about his season?
I mean, there's you can't call it anything else but clutch. He started out 0-5, and then just winning out to make it into playoffs. I mean, just like I said, people once they figured out their team, they started to have it figured out, and performed much better in the second half of the season. And I mean, Dragapult, Grimmsnarl, amazing things to build teams off of, can always bring them, always can put in work. And then, you also have mons like Victini and Neolego, which are just also big threats that, if they look good in the matchup, they're going to do fantastically. So, I think you should be real proud of his season, the way he finished it out.
I think this is kind of the opposite of Zach's team, where Zach's team was very one-dimensional. Even if these mons were one-dimensional, I think there was still just enough wiggle room in there. And like you'd said, if they were good in a matchup, they could absolutely dominate a matchup. Stevie was super easy to work with too. Seems like he's very, very accepting of others' ideas whenever he's teaming up with folks, and he ended up beating a lot of coaches that nobody expected to beat. Big props to him. Steve, anything else before we wrap him up and move on?
Man, I'm just double checking, and small correction: he did not start 0-5.
Oh,
he started at 3-2. But yeah, he had a great season throughout. Ended up with the winning record, and I was I think for us three kind of the biggest surprise of the season, with based on previous performances moving to this season. Very strong performance.
Definitely excellent all over the place. And now we get to move on to a very fun portion where we get all three of us in a row. Yes, now start ending up at number 6. It's the Waterdeep Wobbuffets. Steve ending up at 6-5, even with a -1 differential, still super solid. I think it was definitely a big mid-season turnaround. His biggest strength was that little chunk in the middle of the season there. A lot of success against top teams as well. I know he beat me both times he played against me. Ended up beating another one of the top coaches in John. Ended up beating our other co-host here, and just in that little stretch as well. I think a lot of success came off of the back of his first pick, Tapu Fini, as well. That thing is so diverse. It can set up by itself. It can set up for other mons by lowering some speed stats and everything. It's so difficult to get rid of, so annoying. He was able to pair it up very well with a lot of these other mons. I saw a lot of fun things from Pheromosa, which was outstanding to see from your last pick. And then a lot of interesting, fun to play around. I saw some matches won by Celesteela, some matches won by Serena. Able to kind of mix and match, mostly again around that Fini. And lastly, I would like to say Horse. Steve, what do you think about your team?
Horse. I can get behind Horse. I stand with Horse. I very much have enjoyed nearly all of them are get KOs, get more stats, which is maybe led me to certain play styles. But all in all, the team's very strong. You mentioned the Feeney. A lot of times looking at a matchup, it's like, all right, if I set up a Calm Mind, what hits me? And there's very few mons that I am worried about after a Calm Mind boost. And that's been a huge help.
It seems like it has just enough coverage past that as well.
Right. Additionally, you mentioned Pheromosa. That's always good. First thing I can look at every week is, all right, on my partner's team, is there anything that would benefit from base 151 speed? Is there anything that would benefit from +1 attack and +1 defense? It kind of opens up a lot more options there in the team building and can get the discussion started.
Absolutely. Michael, anything else on Steve's team before we move on?
Horse.
And speaking of moving on, and speaking of Michael, we are going to move on to the Route 1 Birbs, who also finished 6-5 with a +12 differential. Steve, talk about Michael's success this season.
Yeah, so Michael's success came in the first half of the season. 2-4 in the second half. Not spectacular, but strong enough start to finish up strong. Some noticeable accomplishments. He is the defeater of Double Horse. Big win there, taking out both horses. But all in all, finished up the season, had an easier first half, a little bit of a more difficult second half, but was able to, keep the differential very solid for where he was. When he won large. As a note, with his matchups, he only lost when paired with the trainers who finished in the bottom 5. When he was paired with everyone else, he won. So how much of that is he's unable to bring people up or other people bring him down? There's a little bit of discussion there, especially finishing middle of the pack. But all in all, solid performance. On his team, Kiram pulling in lots of work. Ice just being a fantastic attacking type, getting stab on that, having options for freeze dry to hit water types that usually resist, or blizzard to hit both of the opponents occasionally, assuming it hits. That happens sometimes. But all in all, fantastic. Urshifu, I know, has also been key in some matchups. The ability to hit through protects in a format where protect is more common it's always a nice threat to have. But yeah.
All right, Michael, what do you have to say about your team and your season?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, I guess, this video is me being wrong about things, talking about people having stronger finishes to their season, getting people's records wrong, yeah, I did way better in the beginning of the season than the end. And, I think it really just came down to, figuring out, I mean, a lot of it was matchups. The Pokemon that I thought were going to do well, especially, like Urshifu, I thought was going to have a much bigger impact, but definitely paled in comparison to the usage I got out of Kiram this format. Things like Urshifu, Indeedee, didn't, my first 2 picks didn't do as much as I was hoping they would, but, I found, towards the end of the season, I was trying to get a little trickier with some of the rest of my team, which definitely put in work. But yeah, definitely had some trouble with the figuring out matchups when, my big brains didn't do as well.
Definitely fair. It turns out Kiram is pretty good. I believe his banned an OU in the middle of our season here. Definitely up and down for you. Including some lows such as losing to cat measles, which is just embarrassing.
To be fair, I called that loss before the match even started. When we were prepping, I said we're going to lose to Ferrostall, and we did.
Turns out that's a pretty good one. But Kiram is also pretty good, and I think there is still a little bit of potential here with the team that we have yet to see. We're going to move on now to the number 4 team. Oh, look at that. That's me. It's the Buffalo Bouffalant at 7-4. Michael, I love having other people talk about me. Why don't you go for it?
Oh yeah, well let's talk about. We'll start off with your strong 11 plus minus. What's that? I had 12. Weird.
Pretty
but
weird that
yeah,
lost both games to me,
yeah. Well, you had a great season. A lot of amazing strategies, a lot of amazing play, and a team that really just put in work. Zapdos was an absolute monster, and I'm not just saying that because my team hates Zapdos. It's just did so much work. Politoed and Clefairy being incredible supports, picking up Zygarde in the middle of your season to add some speed and some great stabs. I think it was just great. Something I want to know about your team, though, some amazing Pokemon. Dracovish and Volcarona didn't really get their time in the sun this season.
That's
Despite
absolutely
being
true.
incredible Pokemon.
Yeah, Dracovish ended up being a little difficult. Obviously, its biggest boon is having Fish's Rend, which is a little tough when you have things like Tailwind running around everywhere, where when people see that one of the better coaches in the league has picked up a Dracovish and everyone rushes to get their Water Absorb on. And I think maybe the biggest thing that I did not foresee as well was the amount of priority and Prankstermons around as well. Things like Follow Me going first, things like Prankster going first, means that Fish's Rend does not get that double boost, and it ends up being a little bit difficult with that too. So yeah, Dracovish definitely a little underperforming there, and Volcarona, very good mon. I really liked it when I've used it, but it seems to kind of double up on some of the weaknesses that the rest of my team has, especially things like Rock Slide being a little bit more common here as well as a coverage move. But overall, yeah, Zapdos, just an absolute house. I brought that to most of my games for sure. Really enjoyed using it, really appreciated using it. Something that I wouldn't mind getting to use in a regular draft season as well. That coverage, just the stab coverage was insane. Aegislash, the sixth round pick, I think also I brought quite often, ended up putting in a ton of work. And totally agree, the support options were very cool too. It didn't feel like I needed to bring Drizzle, Politoed compared to what does Politoed itself provide, and I thought that was a super interesting aspect of the team. Would have been nice to maybe see my partners abuse Rain a little bit more, but a lot of the Water Mons people picked were to counter Dracovish, not to go offensive. But still really fun, really interesting season. Steve, any other thoughts on my team and season before we move on?
Overall, very solid team. Somehow I beat you twice, but still difficult to prep against. Not a lot of shared weaknesses, nothing to hit super hard. And you definitely have the threats here that are a pain to deal with. So, not looking forward to any future matches I may or may not have against you.
It seemed like there are some weird synergies that end up just working out. Shout out to all my teammates for being able to help work around those. Now we're going to move on to our number 3 team. It's Jimmy of the Newport Noctowls, our, I believe, defending champ as well. Jimmy, another successful season, 7-4 plus 13, just ahead of me there by that differential mark. It seems that Jimmy really came alive in the second half here with 4 wins in a row at the end. Slipped a little bit down to 3-4 and then ended 7-4 with that, including some big wins against both the Close Combat Club as well as myself in there. Also had a nice early victory against Steve with Matt, which is pretty embarrassing, and then beat Steve again there, so 2 victories against Steve. So definitely some clutch performances in here. The standout, I think, for sure is that DNC. That thing is a house that can work inside or outside of Trick Room, which it can also provide itself. Plenty of different moves and coverage. Lots of just smart play from Jimmy overall. Gastrodon, absolutely obnoxious. We talked a little bit about Ferrothorn earlier being very tough to take down. Gastrodon is another key last mon standing. That thing is so ridiculous if you don't have the proper grass coverage to bring it down. You may have to resort to some unorthodox tactics, and with Recover added in there, it's so annoying. I also like the speed elements he has in there, not just the Trick Room aspect, but also having just a very fast, strong Weavile, as well as interesting support options with Salamence. Everything just came together pretty well, and he even made a late transaction to pick up that Tangrowth, adding another element to the team with potential Rage Powder, or it's just kind of a budget Amoonguss there in Tangrowth. So super interesting team. It really came alive at the end of the season. Let's see how we can finish it out. Steve, what else do you have to say about his team and season?
Fantastic season. I had a game with him towards the end of the season, and he was a lot of fun to work with. It was a great time there. After working with him, it was quite disappointing knowing that win or lose our battle, we weren't paired together based on our differential going in, and we were both moving up or down by the same amount. So it was sad going in after working with him. I was like, man, I could win a championship with you. This sounds great. But now I can't. So when talking about his team, we haven't even talked about like the Metagross and Salamence, and of course the Charjabug. All key players that need prep for. All around fantastic team and great season.
Really love that Charjabug pick. Michael, anything else to wrap up Jimmy's team and season?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I had to comment on one thing, I think it would just be Weavile. A late pick for him, but the speed, the power, fake out, sash, it just secured so many games, so many strong starts for him that, I think that one really was key in his success.
I think I definitely agree, and it has a little bit of utility too. We saw some interesting sunny day options with it as well. So
yeah,
underrated mon, I think, by all of us, and somehow we let it slip to the 5th round, and Jimmy made it work. All right, and we're now down to our top 2, and it was for the mid-season number 1 seed, John and the Close Combat Club, that finished in 2nd place here, 8-3 plus 15. Steve, talk to us about this absolutely obnoxious team to try and prep for.
Yeah. So John, as mentioned, had a very strong start to the season, starting 5-0. Second half slowed down a little bit, going 3-3, partly due to a more difficult schedule, but still very strong. His new game plan of not prepping for matches seems to be working very well for him. This more laid-back approach, he seems a lot more. He seems to be doing a lot better and having more fun with the league. So it's good to see that working out. As for the battles himself, his kind of strong sense of doubles has been really helping him here, being able to make predictions and play around opposing win conditions, as well as a new ally for John, the Timer. This is by far the most timer I've seen from John, and it's quite a turnaround from the guy who would become very upset as the timer was turned on to turning it on and actually getting the opponents to nearly lose from it, and or you freak out and perhaps misplay because they ran out of time. So that has been a big turnaround for him. As for the team itself, John's team, one of the reasons he's been so successful is looking at his team, I don't think any one Pokemon has stood out as a superstar. Amoonguss, Heatran, and Corviknight have come a lot with their bulk and their support options, but none of them have really stolen the show, as it were. Latias has come frequently as an offensive option, Azumarill with a little more bulk and power, Mimikyu as a Trick Room setter with Disguise, Scrafty with the Intimidate. All of his mons have come and have performed well. Nothing really standing out. So all in all, great season for John, and now he's, number 2 paired with the number 1 going into the playoffs. The favorites going in, but we'll see how it goes. Additionally, John also has the benefit of recruiting for our league during his battles, reaching out to people in the battle like, hey, come back. Fantastic. Love to see it. And, wish him good luck moving forward.
Definitely an indication of his more laid back and a kind of more freeing attitude, which may have contributed to a higher level of play, potentially. Michael, what else do you have to say about John and his season?
Yeah, I think John is the, exception to the rule this season of people kind of finding the backbone of their team and letting it carry them. Kind of, Steve went over it. He has a lot of good but unassuming mons that, all just put in good work. I'm trying to think, and I'm not really sure in any of John's matches, was he really the standout in that match. Heatran definitely had some strong moments, but I think really John just had an amazing ability to support his partners, and his ability to bring other people up, and his ability to, his knowledge of doubles and his ability to just control games. Really very impressive.
Yeah, you guys already covered it. The only note I had down was different mons carried at different times. The only thing I think I'll add is we don't think we've seen everything yet. There are a couple mods in here that I think could put in a whole lot more work. We didn't see, I think, enough Azumarill or Scrafty for how good they are and how well John has used them the couple times he's brought them, which I think is a very difficult thing to overcome, very tough sign for the rest of us who are trying to prep for him in the playoffs. With that all said, we're going to move on to the number 1 seed, finishing at the very top. If you haven't already figured it out, It is Joey of the Akron Aggrons, finishing 9-2, including a final week where he really didn't prep much at all. You could potentially argue just a 9-1 overall there, with the last match not mattering much. Very impressive outing. Michael, what do you have to say about Joey finishing first overall?
I mean, it just overwhelming. The alone at 9-2, an absolutely dominant 26 plus minus. The next highest being 15. It was just dominant the entire season. And, if I had to talk about, his team, it just works. Volcanion, it just is bulky. It clicks Heat Wave. It just works. Landorus Therian, it just works. Cresselia, Talonflame, they just work. But I think the standout of perhaps the entire season, picking it up late, trading for the Electabuzz. This thing was an absolute beast. I mean, I don't think it clicked anything besides Follow Me and Electroweb the entire season. Maybe it did, but it might as well not have. And just those two moves were so incredibly oppressive that, as soon as it got sent in, the opponents just groaned. And I don't think anyone expected an Electabuzz, of all things, to put in such absolute work, but it just did.
Definitely good fit into his team too, with its unique resistances, adding the Follow Me in there. Fantastic. I think for Joey, we did see the same couple mons tend to overperform. Often that Volcanion, like you said, so much work. Electabuzz, as soon as he picked it up, an immediate impact on the team. Cresselia could carry games by itself. But I'm going to say, similar to John, I think there are a couple mons that we could see even more from, which is very scary. I look mainly at the Landorus and the Zarude as a couple of mons that I think he could use even better potentially in the playoffs. That's super scary to me that he's been performing this well without totally exhausting his full list of options here. Steve, anything else you want to talk about with Joey and his team and season?
I mean, when talking about Joey, there's one thing though I need to put up, and that's that although in recent seasons his regular season has been picking up, he continues to choke in the postseason. We'll see if that continues or if having a partner is the solution so that it's not just him. But only time will tell if the curse continues for Joey.
Indeed, number one is an excellent start to help get that seeding off to the right start, but we'll see how they can hold things up. So in conclusion, we're going to kind of run down teams here just a moment more. Number 1 seed is the Akron Aggrons at 9-2, Close Combat Club number 2 seed at 8-3, Newport Noctowls 7-4, along with the Buffalo Bouffalant 7-4 as 3-4 respectively. The Route 1 Birbs 6-5, finishing 5th overall. The Waterdeep Wobbuffets number 6 at 6-5, Steviemallia 6-5 as well at number 7. The CL Steamrollers finishing out at number 8, and that is the seeding there for the playoffs. So before we move on into the actual playoff matches we've got coming up here, we kind of want to reflect a little bit on the season, some of the things that we expected to see, some of the things that we didn't really expect to see that popped out to us. Steve, I'd like to start with you. What stood out about the season, not just from your perspective as an admin anymore, but just overall your thoughts and impressions on the season, the multi-battle format, and how everything went?
The multi-battle format, there were some interesting learning experiences along the way that your partner, although they are your ally, they are not your Pokemon, and some interactions with that. I know at the beginning of the season, figuring out ally switch doesn't work was something. There's been a couple minor mechanics that don't particularly come up in singles as much that have been learned throughout the season that aren't related to terrain, which we all know doesn't exist, and our league has no idea what that does. But all in all, fun season. A lot of the typical doubles came up, things like Protect, of course, very prominent. And because it is a multi-battle instead of just a pure doubles, we're not quite seeing the Smogon doubles meta with things like hazards. If I recall, Stealth Rock was used a grand total of once, and that was against the team that had a grand total of like 5 flying types between them and the Volcarona. So, it made sense in that battle, but we're not quite seeing the Smogon doubles level of hazards and whatnot. Keeping the format unique, and it's something I really enjoyed and look forward to doing again.
Sounds good. Yeah, Michael. Any thoughts on the season overall? Anything that stood out to you as far as the format or season went?
Yeah, no, I think that definitely kind of like Steve said, the interesting discrepancies between, a doubles battle and a multi-battle definitely stood out. I'd say though that, kind of something that I'd be interested in, if we ever took another crack at this kind of format, I think we talked about people, finding the backbones of their team, some, very good Pokemon just not getting the time to put in, the work that maybe they could have, getting passed over for just, the old reliables. And, I'd say that the second half of the season definitely showed some more nuanced strategy and play. I think there was a lot more synergy between, what you were doing with you and your partner. And, I think it'd be really interesting to see, if people can if we, with more experience, they could bring out some really interesting, really surprising stuff from, some of those Pokemon that just need a little bit of thought to really make work.
Absolutely. No matter how many different months we saw, it did tend to be often kind of the same sets where we really appreciated things like seeing the pledge moves, even if they didn't end up working. Seeing things like Perish Song coming up once. The one instance of Stealth Rock, being creative like that, I think was definitely my favorite part of the season overall. I guess one thing I want to touch on is how prominent Protect was. I think probably the best move in the format to help kind of define what you can go into, what you can hit into, what you're aiming to save, really read what the other is doing. When you're able to read Protect, you get so far ahead. It certainly feels like several matches revolved around the move Protect, and similarly to the kind of creativity with switching. While we could say that some mons were prominent, they could just kind of sit there and do whatever. Smart switching, I think, was often a key to a lot of these victories, too, which makes it a little surprising, perhaps, that Stealth Rock didn't come up as much as it did. But as we've already touched on a little bit, maybe you just need some weaknesses there to actually bring that down. Also interesting that some of the item choices ended up boiling down to the same few there as well. Didn't see nearly as much creativity. A little bit of weakness policy shenanigans. I really enjoyed seeing the Selakberry with weakness policy. That was a lot of fun. But it sure seemed like a lot of mons just, obviously Eviolite for some has to come. We saw quite a few leftover citrus berries, a couple of focus ashes. It would be interesting to see maybe, like Michael said, if we did this again, to maybe see some of the variety that we can get with some of those items. The last thing I want to touch on, not nearly as many physical attackers, I think, as we anticipated either. That could be the prominence of Intimidate, potentially, but it sure seemed like special attackers overwhelmed the format compared to physical attackers. Thought that was super interesting. With all that said, we're going to do a quick preview here of our playoff matches. And we say quick preview, and I think you'll understand why once we see the second one here. But first off, as we've said before, in the playoffs, the 1 and 2 seed will be facing the 7 and 8, and the 3 and 4 will be facing the 5 and 6. So the first matchup we're going to be looking at here is the Akron Aggrons and the Close Combat Club teaming up, numbers 1 and 2 versus Steviemallia and that's the Seattle Steamrollers teaming up as 7 and 8. Something interesting about the playoffs is that does mean we'll have two winners here. Steve, what do you think overall about the teams in this matchup? How do you expect it to go, and anything else interesting that you find?
So for this matchup, I haven't looked at it in detail, but I would definitely favor the 1 and 2 here of John and Joey. They've both had great seasons, and from what I've seen so far, I don't see any reasons they can lose, besides, of course, the curse. But yeah, John and Joey both have teams that, as we mentioned, so many different mons that have worked well for them, and so much more to do. They seem to have a lot more options, whereas especially the CL Steamrollers is a little more of a predictable team with either their fast, frail offense or their trick room. It'll be interesting to see how that works with Stevie's kind of grab bag of a team, and if they can work something out. And if they do, it's the curse. It couldn't be them doing well. It's surely just the curse.
Michael, any thoughts on this matchup?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, our 1 and 2 seeds are obviously the heavy favorites. And just looking at the teams, looking at how everyone's played, I think this is definitely going to be a story of, can they just find a way to chip through John and Joey. Both of them have pretty bulky just kind of reliable teams. And, if they can sort of live a hit and get a KO back, you're not going to win that exchange over and over. So I think will be an interesting match for sure.
Definitely. I think Joey has kind of stood out as one of, if not the top team for most of the season, and Chad and the Steamrollers, I believe, were the last team to clinch by at least a full week. So in that sense, overall, it looks like the 1 and 2 seeds are heavily favored. But I think the other very interesting thing here is that one of these teams will move to the finals, and whichever one of them does, it means that we will have a new finalist in the league at the very least. Chad, of course, has won a championship and been in several finals in the past, but this would be Stevie's first appearance, and maybe more notably, because they're the 1 and 2 seeds, neither Joey nor John has made a finals appearance, though they have taken many trips to the semifinals. This surely seems like the season to do it. I'm excited to see if they can figure out their prep here, figure out their teamwork. This seems to me more so like a practice match for the finals for them because they've dominated so much. But hey, they've been cursed for so long, I don't think we can assume anything at all. And we'll see, maybe Chad, with his experience, can even help Stevie out and take him to a finals in maybe the biggest single season turnaround we've ever seen. And of course, with the second semifinals match, we've alluded to it, but here we are. Number 3, Newport Noctowls, paired with your number 4, Buffalo Bouffalant, facing both of my two co-hosts here, the number 5, Route 1 Birbs, and the number 6, Waterdeep Wobbuffets. This should be an interesting and very fun matchup. As much as I'd love for you two to spill your guts about it, Michael, what are your overall impressions of the matchup here?
It's going to be tricky. I think all 4 teams here have very strong, very versatile Pokemon. And we could see anything in this match. And it's going to be a real treat, unless someone brings something completely dominant and completely unprepped for it and just win. But even so, seeing that would be a treat.
I think we've seen some gimmicks that have absolutely dominated this season. So there's still a chance for something weird that also tips the scales one way or another, but I totally agree. All of us have been up and down a little bit, but it was very interesting to see the last couple weeks of the season, seeing so many coaches just shoved all together right here in this spot. John was able to pull away at the very end, and Stevie fell off a little bit at the end, and that means the 4 of us, who are all right next to each other, neck and neck, all get to play each other in the same match. This should be an absolute blast. Looking forward to this one quite a bit. Steve, any other thoughts on this matchup?
Another interesting thing with this matchup is the history going into it. I know throughout the season I swept the Buffalo Bouffalant, who swept the Route 1 Birbs, who swept the Newport Noctowls, who swept me. So going in, both teams have swept one of the other and got swept by the other. So it seems like our teams, if there's anything to read into those matchups, no one has a clear advantage. So we'll see how that plays out.
This definitely seems like destiny that we're all to play each other here. The only possible new finalist here is Michael of the Birbs. And Steve also has been out of the finals for quite a bit, compared to your Bouffalant being, I believe, 4-time champions, and Alphels and the Noctowls winning just last season. So while we're all very even, recent history favors the 3 and 4 as well as the seeding, but I think this matchup is way too close to be able to decide like that. This should be super fun to see. Any closing thoughts then before we wrap up the post-season review here, before we get into the playoffs? Steve, anything for us?
Really looking forward to the playoffs and the end of the season. Also looking forward to start discussing future seasons. This has been quite a long season. Started in September or October, and it'll finish up in early February. We knew going in it was going to be a long season, and excited to see the conclusion of it and move on with other leagues.
11 weeks with 2 buys, but season 10 right around the corner, double digits. Very cool. Michael, any thoughts wrapping things up here?
I think this season, in one word, has been surprising. I think we, all came at it from, thinking of it not necessarily as a joke, but, it was, multi-battles, that's a fun gimmick. And there's a surprising amount of depth to read into in all of this. So I think it's been real cool. Can't decide on my favorite match. I really do enjoy not immediately losing in my week 1 match because of a double heat wave miss, but also I think endure weakness policy baton pass Dragapult next to Fling's Slackberry partner is probably gonna it's just got a special place in my heart now.
Absolutely. I will always remember being able to bring down Matt's Fairthorn with a Perish Song, and just imagining the look on his face whenever we get to moments like that. We were able to get a lot of creativity here for sure. This was a total blast. It's not quite over yet. We'll see you potentially reviewing at least one of these matches. Hopefully we'll be able to get at least something up for the finals to be able to let you all know. So more in-depth discussion on that. We're going to have 2 winners this season. Very cool. Thank you for joining me, Steve. Thank you for joining me, Michael. And we'll see you next time.